Hey everyone, Howie Fisher from Fisher's Flies. Thanks for checking in as always. Today I'm tying Peterson spawning shrimp. This is a pattern that I recently learned to tie. I'm going to be tying it on an Arex SA250 shrimp hook in size 4. This is a bent shrimp hook designed specifically for shrimp patterns for saltwater. For eyes, I'm going to be using dumbbell brass eyes in large in black nickel, but obviously switch that up based on your needs. For thread, I'm going to be using Vivus Power Thread, which is a 140 denier thread in fluorescent pink. When I tie patterns like this up in bulk, I like to tie all of the dumbbell eyes on ahead of time, so that way I'm not continuing to mess with super glue and so on and so forth. So I've done that here. I'm just going to put the thread back on, and then I'm going to take the thread back to just behind the barb of the hook as a tie-in point for when I start tying materials in. So the first material that I tie in here is going to be a egg yarn. This is specifically from Orvis, just in orange. I'm going to take a clump of the yarn, and then I'm going to cut it off, and I'm actually going to split it in half so it's not as big. I like to twist the material around in my fingers and try and misalign the ends so it's a little bit more of a natural taper. For this egg sac on the shrimp, I'm going to be making it about the length of the hook shank. So if you tie it on and feel like it's too long or too short, you can always adjust it like I did. Once I get it where I want it, I'm going to cut that extra off, and then I'm going to take thread wraps back to that tie-in point that I made earlier by the hook barb. Once I get it back there, I'm going to do 2 or 3 wraps underneath. As you see, I just did. This helps with durability as well as keeping it in the section you want it. For the next material, I'm going to be using EP fibers in tan. I'm going to take a small portion here, and these are kind of, legs, tentacles, the front part of the shrimp. I'm going to go ahead and bring that over the hook point like you saw me do. I'm going to tie it in, again, just a couple wraps to make sure it's the length I want it. I like to measure it against a fly that I've already tied, as you can see I did there. Once I've got it where I want it, then I'll make sure it's secured. With this, I like to pull up and make sure that that material stays on top of the egg yarn, because you obviously don't want that veiled or covered too much. Again, I'm going to just make sure this is all secure, tie it back to where I want to, cut it off, and then kind of clean it up a little bit. An even body on this fly is not crucial, but it makes tying the hair in later much easier and much even. This didn't exactly lay down the way that I wanted it to, so I'm just trying to finagle it and make it look a little bit better, a little bit more tapered, a little bit more even. So once I've got it where I want it, the next material I tie in is going to be the legs, the front legs. For this, I'm using silly legs, and I'm using sandbarred. Again, you can use whatever color you'd like. I'm just taking one piece, cut it off the string, the whole pack of silly legs, and then I'm going to cut that one piece in half, and that seems to be just about the perfect length for one of these flies. And then if you're tying in smallers, you can cut that length a little bit shorter if you need to once you've got them tied in. So I'm just going to wrap the legs around the thread, and then I'm going to get it where I want it. Make sure one leg is on each side of the hook. Once I've got those legs where I want, then I'm going to wrap back again to that tie-in point. Don't want to pull too hard, otherwise it'll shoot your legs in different directions. Next material is going to be the antennae. I'm going to use Crystal Flash in black. Just half a strand is good. Again, going to wrap it around the thread like you see me doing here, and then going to bring it to the top of the hook. I like to secure it with a couple wraps, separate it, get it where I want it, hold it, and then wrap back. This just makes it a little bit easier to tie that material where I want it. For the antenna, you make it pretty long if you look at a shrimp, so make it about 2 times the length of the silly legs that you tied in. Seems to be a good tie-in reference. Again, as I'm tying this fly, I'm just working on trying to make this body a little bit even. I'm going to put some super glue on the bottom of this fly because it is exposed at the end. So just trying to make it more durable. Make sure those thread wraps don't come undone too quickly. So the next material I'm going to tie on are the eyes. So there's a couple ways you can do it. I've found and like these plastic shrimp eyes from Stonfo. Super simple. They're not that expensive either. Saves you a lot of time on tying or on creating your own eyes, mono eyes, with UV resin, so on and so forth. So I'm just going to tie it in. Before I wrap it too tight, I'm going to put some super glue on, make sure that is saturated because I don't want those eyes to fly out or come out. Once I've got that super glue on, just going to secure it. Make sure it's not going anywhere. So for the next material, I'm going to be using Magnum rabbit strips in grizzly or natural hair. You can use tan or another color if you want. I just like the Magnum because it's a lot of hair. You can use regular. I'm just going to cut off a good chunk. There's no real measuring to this, just a good chunk. And I'm going to tie this on top, or I guess on bottom of the hook, if you're looking at the hook as is on top. I'm going to tie this not all the way back to where the tie-in point has been, as you can see, but because I don't want to cover those eyes, but I do want it to start covering the body and start that shrimpy looking body. So I'm going to tie a clump in, make sure it's evenly spread around. Once I get it where I want it, I'm going to cut that off. And then really you're just repeating this process 4, 5, 6 times, however many times you need to get to the front of the hook. The entire rest of the body is this rabbit strip, or clumps of this rabbit strip. You can tie it a little bit more sparsely if you want. You can tie it more thick if you want. But again, just going to go ahead and repeat this step several times until you get to the front of the hook. Okay, so once you get to the front of the hook and you've repeated that process, I'm going to tie one clump in right in front of the dumbbell eyes, and this is going to kind of cover that gap, that blank space. So I'm going to tie it in, like I said, right in front of the dumbbell eyes. I like to give it a couple wraps, 3, 4 wraps on top of, get it where I want it, and then I'm going to wrap in front of that clump. So I'm going to pull it up a little bit and give it 2, 3 wraps in front. What that does is it just helps cinch down those thread wraps. And then 2 ways you can do this part. You can either put super glue directly on the clump like I'm doing here, or if you don't feel as comfortable doing that, you can put it on your thread and wrap that around the hook shank. And all that does is really just help secure that clump, because you are working with so little space in front of those eyes. Especially with the next step being hard mono. This is going to be a weed guard. So I'm using 16 pound. You can use 20 pound, whatever you have a preference for. I'm going to cut off a small chunk, probably about 5 or 6 inches. I like to bend it in half before putting it on, actually. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it underneath the hook eye, and I'm going to start tying it on that way. I find it easier to do this and just keep the mono on either side. Once I've got it wrapped back, I'll do a couple wraps behind the mono. And as you're going along, just, make sure that this mono is where you want it to be as you're doing this, because you are laying this on top of super glue, so it can be difficult to go back and adjust after the fact if you want to, or if you need to take the entire thing off. So adjust it several times as needed as you're going through the process. Once you've got it where you want, you can whip finish, cut it off. And I like to finish my head with some Solar Bone Dry or UV resin. And the reason for this is that way I can really get those weed guards to stay exactly where I want them. So on this specific one, the weed guards were pointing in towards each other, so I just split them after I put that on and held them in place, and then hit them with that UV light. So you can see here, they're going to stay exactly split like that where they are. Again, just a little thing that helps, I think. So this is the Peterson spawning shrimp.